It's time for the game that stars one of Capcom's previous mascots. It's time for Captain Commando. Captain Commando is a side-scrolling beat-em-up game released in 1991. It was developed and published by Capcom for their Ps1 arcade system. But before the Captain had his own game, he used to be the fictional spokesman of Capcom. You'll find him in the packaging and manual of the company's earlier titles for the NES, thanking and congratulating players for buying the products. Going back, the game got ported across several platforms. If you can't tell based on my videos, we'll be looking at the Ps1 port because I don't have to explain myself. The port was a Japan-only release in 1991 by New Inc. Why it's Japan only, I don't know. That said, I'll take this as an excuse to use the original Japanese names. In Captain Commando, you play as one of the 4 members of Team Commando. You fight superpowered criminals from Metro City all the way to one of Jupiter's moons. The goal is to beat Genocide, the leader of the superpowered criminals. Time for gameplay. If you didn't know, this game is one of the many spiritual successors of Final Fight, Capcom's first beat-em-up game. That said, I'll try my best not to compare it to Final Fight. I'm glad to say that Captain Commando can stand on its own. It has its own features, however the core gameplay is still Final Fight. This makes it feel familiar for old players, yet something new at the same time. Personally, I think the game is teetering between being a new experience and Final Fight, but it's in the future. It's not necessarily a bad thing. In the end, it's either a new game or it's similar to an older game. I just got thrown off, but again, that's just me. Moving on, as a beat 'em up, you mainly go through the stages while fighting enemies along the way. Simple stuff. However, I'd like to remind everyone that this is an arcade game. There will be cheap moments. I know arcade difficulty is a subjective topic, but getting credits is what they do best. Luckily, we're using the Ps1 port, so it's a non-issue. For controls, it's similar regardless of your character. Use the D-pad to move, and double tapping one of them will make you run. X lets you jump, square lets you attack, and triangle lets you do a super move, which is different per character. Characters play similarly despite some minor differences. They all have attack combos, super moves, jump attacks, run attacks, jumping run attacks, and grab attacks. As mentioned earlier, you can play as either Captain Commando, the leader of the team, Gennady, the alien mummy, Sho the ninja, or Hoover, the genius baby who fights with a robot. Now it's time for a special segment, Why Gennady is the best character, where I list down the reasons why. There's no science to back this up, just trust me on this. Stop giving me that look. Reason number 1. Gennady is an alien mummy. He stands out just based on who he is. The others are humans, and the only one really unique is Hoover because he is a baby on a robot. Reason number 2. He melts his enemies. Burning them into ashes? Nice. Slicing them in half? Cool. Watching them melt piece by piece? Freaking satisfying. Reason number 3. You can move around when using the special move. This probably sounds stupid, but the others fix you in place. I call it his spin to win. Reason number 4. The special move has a giant hitbox and hits everyone around you. It's the ultimate FU to groups of enemies or hard to avoid boss attacks. What? I have to talk about the others? Really? Fine. The captain can shock or burn enemies with his gauntlets, Sho slices enemies in half and the only one that can use ninja items, and Hoover can do wrestling moves. There's no problem with the characters mechanically. If anything, they share the same weaknesses, slow movement speed and a long hit stun, both of which I hate. I know the characters can run, but one huge problem is that they can only run for a certain amount of time. Not to mention there's a running attack that could mess up your placement around the stage. As for the hit stun, I noticed that you're vulnerable during the stun, so if enemies attack you consecutively, it's not a fun experience. Let's move to the stages. There are 9 stages in total and they're really short, lasting about a minute or 2. There are no gimmicks, it's simply going from point A to B while beating up enemies. This makes going through the stages straightforward, but boring at the same time. Yes, there are enemies to keep you occupied and graphics to look at, but they are their own element and can't really fully compensate for whatever is lacking in stage design. Speaking of stage design, one thing I really dislike is how the stages are divided into sections. The sections are to give this feeling of progression through the stage, and the screen transition definitely helps it feel as such. However, they love dividing sections too much that it's jarring. There are a lot of stages that would have fared better if it was one flowing section. It also doesn't help that removing some sections doesn't really change how a stage flows. It's like it was there for padding instead of as a tool to make big and immersive levels. The stages tend to move between good flow and properly designed, and why is it divided like this? In lieu of this, I've decided to make this chart quickly detailing each stage. However, I will highlight those that are noteworthy for better or worse. The intro stage is the best example of a single section stage. Yes, it's the first stage, and if gaming stereotypes are to be followed, it's not to be complicated. However, it successfully shows to players that you don't need to divide a stage into sections with transitions just to be able to change the scene. In this stage, you go from somewhere in the city to inside a bank, with no black screen transitions. It was one flow without gameplay disruption. Circus Camp is the best example of unnecessary division and unneeded amount of sections. The stage is made of 4 sections with transitions in between. This didn't have to be the case. You could say that it made the stage feel big, but I'd argue, why does it have to be this big? A few sections could have been combined together for better stage progression. Seaport is a direct continuation to Circus Camp. It isn't a new stage, but more of a quick interlude focusing on taking out as many enemies as you can to get some extra points. It's a nice pace breaker, and being placed in the middle of the game made it feel right. However, I dislike that it has 2 sections, with the latter being a time chase to defeat Dr. TW. The division wasn't necessary. This could have been one long chase alongside the extra points gimmick. The final stage is the only stage where the sections worked. You had to go through the first section before being able to enter the final boss room, which is an entire section on its own. It's a form of build-up. Time for the enemies, starting with the cannon fodder. Spoiler warning, the generic enemies have more life and personality than the bosses. The mooks all have specific actions and attacks that make them stand out between each other. This also makes them feel unique despite some being a palette swap of others. Not to mention, this makes you behave differently per enemy, spicing up the whole punch them to death gameplay. Fighting them is simply fun. There are 16 enemies, but they can be grouped into 6 types, 9 if you want each unique enemy to be its own group. Thanks to their variety and behavior, they are definitely the best part of this game. Let's move to the bosses who you fight at the end of each stage. They are definitely the weakest part of this game. The bosses are boring to fight except for Genocide, but he's on a different spectrum. There's barely any quirks, life, or feeling to them. It's not a straightforward fight, it's a waste of time. They are only different in looks, but that obviously can compensate for everything else that's lacking. You'll surely think you're fighting the same boss over and over again. It doesn't help that one simple strategy can deal with all the bosses. In turn, one shared weakness. I know punching them to death isn't a weakness, and maybe it's a consequence of having simple battle mechanics. But special move when they attack then rush in is not a good reflection on the boss fights. Because of this, here's another chart showing the bosses. I do want to give a few special mentions though. Inefficient boss award goes to Strom Jr. for having a rifle but not using it properly. The same award goes to Strom and Druk for more stupid reasons. First off, yes, there's a stage where there's 2 bosses. Second, the problem is that it's a repeat of Strom Jr., so it's now twice as boring. Third, it's more stupid because you don't have to kill both bosses to win the fight. You just have to kill one of them to win. What the hell? Cool boss fight award goes to Doppel because it's a clone fight. You get to fight yourself. Another point for him because at some point in the fight, he will split into 2, cloning into another member of the Commando team. Yeah, you get to fight 2 separate entities despite coming from the same guy. And you have to kill all the Doppels to win the fight. This makes Strom and Druk trash. So about the final boss fight, Genocide. This guy is infuriating. I know he's the final boss, but he's outright unfair. He flies around the room quickly reminding you of your slow movement speed. His main attack is firing an ice or fire projectile, behaving similar to the Ride Armors, more on them later. If you're running, then he fires a projectile, just take it, it's unavoidable. If he hits you, he'll move away, so it's another chase. He can even turn himself invincible and cast explosions around the room. Oh, you finally got close? Well, too bad! He's gonna grab and throw you away. This fight is a long grind. Oh, you hit him? Here's a huge knockback that places him in spots that you can't reach. The only tip I can give is just look at the character shadows for attack precision. Oh, and he has the largest health. And speaking of health, I know this is a carryover from Final Fight, but I wish they improved the feedback of enemy health. Some enemies have a different colored health bar, meaning they have more health. The issue with this approach is its actual meaning. What does white health mean? What does blue health mean? What is its value? All I know is that it isn't yellow, so I'm not emptying it anytime soon. They could have at least put how many full bars the enemy had instead. Let's move on to the other parts of the game mechanics. Items return to this game. There are two types of items: food, which restores health, and weapons, which are used to kill enemies. Weapons can then be further divided into either melee or ranged weapons. I appreciate bringing back the items. Obviously, food is great since it gives health, and weapons provide a quick break from the punching. I personally find using weapons slower than punching, but I'll admit it's fun to hit the enemy with something but our fists. An addition to this game are the aforementioned ride armors. There are 3 ride armors: a melee ride armor, a fire ride armor, and the ice ride armor. Despite their different attacks, they can all damage an enemy by jumping and landing on them. Back then, I would always try my best to ride one of the armors. I feel they're more of a liability than an asset. They're so cool and it's fun to use, but I notice I'm spending more time placing myself in the right areas to avoid enemy attacks than actually attacking. The right armors are still appreciated nonetheless. Now for the other parts of the game, starting with the graphics. The graphics are pretty good. I like the bright and vibrant colors used, as it definitely helps in pushing forward the game's setting as well as the sounds. I appreciate how everything looks well together. There's a cohesive art style, nothing looking out of place. But at the same time, entities such as the characters have subtle details that help them pop up despite the cohesive art style. The animations are amazing too. I'm not just talking about the quality, but the amount of animations made for certain scenarios. There's an animation for being electrocuted, getting chopped in half, and in Hoover's case, multiple animations for his different deaths. Not to mention that the animations are smooth with no hang-ups at certain frames. What about the music? Well, like the art, it has cohesive musical style and genre. Nothing sounded out of place unless it has something to do with theming like Stage 3's music. But I think the cohesive music style sort of backfired at the stage music since a lot tend to sound similarly. Unless I'm playing that specific stage, it's kinda hard to pinpoint which music is for which stage unless it's something thematic. Weirdly enough, I think anything else that wasn't a stage background music really sticks out to me. Most boss fight music are awesome, like Strong Jr.'s fight despite his lackluster battle, or Doppel's eerily haunting battle music, which is probably the best out of all of them. Then of course there are the sound characters make, which really fit who they are and what they look. Let's not forget the end credits music, which definitely stands out because it's the only drastically different music in the whole game. Personally, only the ghost sound irritated me as it plays in very short intervals. It also has a high-pitched sound, making it a tad ear-grating. Captain Commando may seem like an average beat-em-up, but as I've mentioned, it has its own luster. It may come off as Final Fight but is futuristic, which is a definite hurdle. Because of this, I personally wish that Capcom had put more mechanics or content to it at the time of its development. But I'm not gonna deny that what we got is still a good game. If for some reason anyone at Capcom is watching this video, please give the Captain another chance. We obviously acknowledge it exists based on Charlie's Street Fighter V costume. This might be the bias talking, but I think the Captain could really use a modern take similar to what you did with Strider a few years ago. If you want to play the game, your best bet is either emulation or buying the Capcom Beat 'em Up bundle, which is out on the PC and every current gen console as of this video. The bundle contains Final Fight, Knights of the Round, and Battle Circuit, just to name a few. It also adds online multiplayer, removing the need for other players in the same physical location. Trying to get a copy of the Ps1 Port is a nightmare with how rare and overpriced the copies are selling. As for the SNES version, it's sort of a downgrade to the original, making it a game of its own. I'd personally try not to get it unless you want it for a collection or you're really curious. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.